Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Niagara West.
And thank you very much, Madam Speaker. As always, I'm honoured and proud to stand up in this place and speak on behalf of my constituents of Niagara West. I want to start by reading a quote. This is how it goes. One of the biggest pressures on people right now is housing. Young Canadians, particularly millennials and Gen Z, are being priced out of their communities. Families are finding it difficult to get a good place to settle down. Rising rents and the high cost of buying a home are making it more difficult for younger generations to find a place to call their own. We need more homes in Canada, and we need to keep them affordable. You know where I found this quote, Madam Speaker? In one of the government's news releases last week. After 9 years of bungling the economy, inflation, taxation, and housing, they finally acknowledged that what we have been doing isn't working. They're acknowledging that they've done generational harm to millennials, Gen Z, and other younger folks. It's that simple, and it's written down. They've admitted it in that very statement. What they say after is the usual promises about to be broken. And by the way, they're recycling their promises from 9 years ago. Promises from 9 years ago, Madam Speaker. If they haven't been able to get things done in 9 years, who's going to believe that they'll be able to get things done now? Absolutely no one. At this point, Canadians no longer believe them. Millennials and Gen Z don't believe them. Why? Because according to reports, nearly 60% of retirees are supporting their adult children financially. And what does this do to their parents' finances? Of course, it's having a negative impact on their own finances. So whether young or older, the Liberals are making everyone poor. How much poorer? The average Canadian family is poorer by $3,687. Families who used to donate to food banks are now going to food banks for themselves. We have record visits to food banks, 2 million visits in a single month. And to make matters worse, Canada will spend $54.1 billion to service our national debt. $54.1 billion is a lot of money to pay just on interest. $54.1 billion is more money than the government is sending to the provinces for health care. This was entirely self-inflicted, entirely. They'll blame the world, they blame Conservatives, they blame everyone and anyone they can think of. They call them horrible names. We know their playbook, and Canadians are wise to it as well. It's time for them to take responsibility for the financial mess they've created, a mess that many Canadians can no longer endure. People are leaving Canada. Immigrants come to this country and realize it's impossible to afford a life, and oftentimes leave and take their skills elsewhere.
The Honourable Member, 2 seconds. Can we check the noise outside, please, in the courtyard? Thank you. The Honourable Member for Niagara West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. But again, oftentimes leave and take their skills elsewhere. But again, Madam Speaker, the Liberals admitting their failures in a statement, so there's no backtracking anymore. It's been 9 years of abject failure on the housing file and many others. Young folks can't afford to buy a home. Most have given up and think of owning a home as only for the rich. 8 in 10 believe that owning a home in Canada is now only for the rich. This is a staggering statistic. It's the first time in Canada where young Canadians will be worse off than their parents. And it's not just now. Unless a younger person purchases a home, they're unlikely to build significant equity. This will result in a much smaller retirement savings down the road. So it's not just now that young folks are worse off than their parents. It may be for the rest of their lives because the Prime Minister and his policies. It wasn't this way when the Prime Minister was elected in 2015. And it won't be this way when he's gone. And let's be frank, if they caused it for the past 9 years, they don't know how to fix it. It's very clear, and the record speaks for itself. They're the photo op government, but that's where it ends, at photo ops. We'll be getting things done, government, in due time, Madam Speaker, in due time. On the topic of housing still, interest rates are also a major factor as to why folks can't buy homes. Last week in committee, the Governor of the Bank of Canada once again confirmed that the Prime Minister's spending is not helpful when it comes to bringing down inflation and lowering interest rates. That's just a toned-down way of saying stop. Just stop the spending. That's what the Governor of the Bank of Canada really wants to say, but can't because of the political waves he would create. But Canadians are wise, and they can read between the lines. The fact is that $61 billion in new spending is making inflation worse and making interest rates stay higher for longer. This inflationary spending is the equivalent of pouring fuel on the inflationary fire. For folks watching at home, keep in mind that inflation is just another tax on you. It's not enough that the Liberals increase the disaster carbon tax by 23% and then make sure to increase it every year on April 1st, but they can't help themselves, and this will only make things worse with inflationary budgets. And if they don't believe me, they should listen to their own fellow Liberals. What are some of their Liberal pals saying about how things are going? Former Finance Minister Bill Morneau said this budget is a threat to investment and economic growth. Companies will think twice about investing in Canada. Another Liberal, David Dodge, a former governor of Bank of Canada, said this: the budget is the worst budget since 1982. Former Liberal Finance Minister John Manley told the Prime Minister that he was pressing on the inflationary gas pedal with his spending that ballooned interest rates. I mentioned the carbon tax. Let's get back to that for a second. The carbon tax is this government's notoriously bad signature policy. Almost every provincial premier has come out publicly against it. The carbon tax makes everything more expensive without having any impact on the environment. What's happening to this? They hike the carbon tax and emissions still go up. According to the government, if carbon taxes go up, emissions should go down. False. That's not the case, and that's not true. What is true is that the carbon tax is just another cash grab for the Liberals, and everyone knows it. They just refuse to admit it. The Parliamentary Budget Officer has also been very clear that the majority of Canadians will pay more of their money in carbon taxes than they will get back in rebates. In other words, the Liberals take more than they give back, and they expect Canadians to thank them for this ripoff. Canadians are wiser than what the Liberals think of them. 70% of Canadians are against the carbon tax because they see it for the scam that it is. The Prime Minister and his party, though, through their disastrous policies of the last 9 years, is playing with people's lives and doesn't seem to care that folks are hurting, and they are hurting badly. He's doubled their rent, doubled their mortgages payments, and doubled the down payment necessary to purchase a home. He's making Canadians pay higher taxes for food, higher taxes for heating, and doubling housing costs. Family budgets are broken, Madam Speaker. There is nothing extra or even negative at the end of the month when all the bills are paid. We've had 3 demands for the budget: axe the carbon tax on farmers and food, build the homes, not more bureaucracy, and cap spending with a dollar-for-dollar rule to bring down interest rates and inflation. All 3 are common sense policies. All 3 make life more affordable for Canadians, but the Liberals refuse to do any of them. Are they too blinded by their ideology of big ballooning governments gone out of control to see what they're doing and hurting Canadian families and their wallets? They're also hurting small businesses. They're hurting investment. They're hurting productivity. Madam Speaker, you know things have gotten very bad when among Canadians who do not own a home, over 7 in 10 say they have given up hope on ever owning a home. They've actually given up. That's not the Canada that I know, Madam Speaker. Business insolvencies have surged 87% year over year in the first quarter of 2024, while consumer insolvencies have risen by 14%. The Canadian Association of Insolvency and Restructuring Professionals said that by far, this is the largest year-over-year increase in business insolvencies in 37 years of records. The association's chair, Andre Bolduc, said this: a perfect storm of economic challenges is brewing, with high mortgage renewal rates, soaring rental prices, and elevated cost of everyday necessities. He added, the high cost of servicing debts is also compounding the financial strain for many Canadians and leaving them grappling with insurmountable debt burdens. Madam Speaker, what this government has given Canadians is consistently increased carbon taxes, high inflation, more taxes, more inflation, housing shortages, a housing crisis, a cost of living crisis. When does this financial debacle end? One thing is for sure, it won't end with this government and with this Prime Minister at the helm. The disastrous policies have to end with an election, and that election will allow for a strong, stable, majority Conservative government. Madam Speaker, we are ready to go on day one. There's a lot for us to fix. They've created this mess, and it won't be easy to clean up, but we're committed. Our leader is committed. I'd like to add an amendment that the motion be amended by deleting all of the words after the word that and substituting the following: The House declined to give second reading to Bill C-69, an act to implement certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on April 16, 2024, since the bill fails to implement a common-sense budget that would, A, axe the carbon tax, B, build the homes, not bureaucracy, by requiring cities to permit 15% more home building each year as a condition for receiving federal infrastructure money, and C, cap the spending with a dollar-for-dollar rule to bring down interest rates and inflation by requiring the government to find $1 in savings for every new dollar of spending.
Perfect. That's a good one.
Mr. Allison, seconded by Mr. Leroux, moves the following amendment: that the motion be amended by deleting all the words after the word "that" and substituting the following: the House declined to give second reading to Bill C-69, an act to implement certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on April 16, 2024, since the bill fails to implement a common-sense budget that would, A, axe the carbon tax, B, build the homes, not bureaucracy, by requiring cities to permit 15% more home building each year as a condition for receiving federal infrastructure money, and C, cap the spending with a dollar-for-dollar rule to bring down interest rates and inflation by requiring the government to find $1 in savings for each new dollar of spending. L'amendement est recevable. Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Madam Speaker, it's interesting they would incorporate the issue of housing inside the amendment itself. All one needs to do is to take a look at the leader of the Conservative Party. When he was Minister of Housing, it was virtually a disaster. Hundreds of millions spent, and I think he built 6 nonprofit housing units that were actually built under his term as Minister of Housing. And yet, we have a government today that is working with municipalities, provinces, different stakeholders to build more units, bringing in budgetary measures. What more does he believe the Conservative Party could actually do to see more houses being built? Is he suggesting that we go back to the way that his leader, when the leader was the Minister of Housing?
Honourable Member for Niagara West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I want to thank my colleague for the question. One of the things he raises, he talks about the hundreds of millions of dollars they're spending, and my challenge with this government is really their competence level. And at the end of the day, this government has no problem spending money. The challenge is actually getting results. We don't have to go back very far. They talked in a previous question talking about the fact that they'd spent all this money under COVID and all these other kinds of things. I want to remind the member that it was a sole source contract for $720 million for ventilators. $720 million, and there was $237 million that went to one of their former colleagues, Frank Bailiff. And so, we talk about spending money. We also need to keep in context accountability and transparency and make sure that we're getting the job done. Any government can promise to spend money, and this government is awesome at spending and awesome at making promises. What they are terrible at is actually delivering. And what they are absolutely incompetent at is managing taxpayers' money in a responsible way. And what happened to all those ventilators? Some of them are still in their wrap, still on docks, and they're actually being sold for $6 for their parts. This is the height of incompetence.
Questions et commentaires.
Questions and comments?
L'honorable député de...
The Honourable Member for Rosemont. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I thank my colleague for his speech, even though I agree with little of it. I'd like to ask a very specific question because we work hard at the NDP to establish new dental care programs so that the least privileged can benefit from it. And now people will be able to obtain dental care nearly without cost, and that started last week, and 80% of their bill will be covered. That will make a difference for millions of Canadians and Quebecers who have been unable to go to the dentist for years. If ever his party wins the next election, does he commit to maintaining the dental care program for the middle class and more disadvantaged people?
For the question, I think one of the things that we will commit to is getting spending under control. What we'll commit to is making sure that how we spend money is transparent. What we will commit to is making sure we get value for our money. And quite frankly, Madam Speaker, this member and his party are the ones propping up this government. So at the end of the day, what's going on? I mean, they can raise any concern they want. They can huff and puff. They can do whatever their concern is, but they still support this government and the decisions and the bad decisions that they make on a regular basis. And so I think, if we are looking for ways to help people, I think one of those ways would be to learn to live within our means so that we can continue to make sure that cost of living comes down and interest rates can then follow after that.
Comments. The honourable member for Kenora.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank my colleague for his speech and for bringing forward a common sense motion. He spoke about how the government is great at spending money but falls short on results. To address housing, the government brought forward a bunch of programs. They doubled the cost of housing to try to address the cost of groceries. They spent a lot of money, and we've seen grocery prices increased along with inflation. And it's caused a lot of economic hardship for Canadians from across the country. I'm wondering if my colleague has any stories, any things that he can share from what he's heard in his own writing about how the Liberals' tax and spend agenda is making life more difficult for Canadians.
The honourable member for Niagara West in 20 seconds.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and to my colleague for asking the question. As a matter of fact, just this past Friday, I had the opportunity to hear from people that are struggling. I was at a poverty roundtable with people from the community, and they shared their stories about how they're having a hard time paying their property taxes. They're having a hard time paying their rent. They're having a hard time paying their groceries, and the fact remains that they have been struggling like no other time in history ever since this government has gotten into power.